Look, if you really want to master your finances, you got to realize pretty early on that it's almost never about reading complex spreadsheets or, picking the absolute perfect stock. It's actually about identifying these deeply psychological mental traps that are quietly and often totally invisibly sabotaging your wealth. So in this explainer, we're going to expose exactly how your mind works against you, and more importantly, how you can completely rewire it to escape those traps.
Which brings us to a pretty fascinating question. Think about it for a second. You're smart, right? You've read the books, you know the basic rules of money, so why do intelligent people consistently make the exact same emotional mistakes? Well, it turns out, intelligence doesn't actually protect you from your inherent biases. In fact, it kind of hides them. Your choices feel completely rational to you because, well, they're yours. And that is exactly the first trap we fall into.
Author Morgan Housel puts this brilliantly. He says, "People do crazy things with money, but no one is really crazy." This quote just hits right at the core of human behavior. See, every single one of us has a completely different generational experience. We all have this unique lens through which we view the world, and that lens dictates what we personally consider to be a quote-unquote rational financial decision.
Let's dive right into Section 1, the emotional equation. We really need to shift our perspective here and realize that our brains are simply not machines. If you want to build lasting wealth, building a plan that actually accounts for messy, unpredictable human emotions works significantly better than a plan based on pure, unfeeling math. Just look at the stark contrast between these two approaches. A coldly rational spreadsheet? Sure, it looks absolutely perfect on your computer screen. It's optimized, it's data-backed, but here's the thing. Spreadsheets don't feel blind panic during a massive market downturn. You do. That perfectly rational plan literally falls apart the minute real-world stress hits. On the flip side, aiming to be mostly reasonable works so much better. A mostly reasonable plan builds in a psychological buffer. It actually helps you survive that overwhelming emotional urge to just abandon your strategy when the world gets incredibly loud.
To really grasp why we need this reasonable approach, let's look at some specific generational lenses. Think about someone who lost absolutely everything in the devastation of the 1929 Great Depression. They're going to view market volatility with pure terror, right? They might never invest a single dollar again. Now, compare them to someone who got incredibly rich during the euphoric 1990s tech boom. That person might actively chase the exact same risks that terrify others. Or think about a young grad scraping by, entering the workforce during the brutal 2008 financial crash, versus a teenager making thousands overnight in the 2017 crypto boom. They are literally living in the exact same world, but looking through completely different lenses. Neither is crazy. They're just playing the game based on what they've personally experienced.
Moving on to Section 2, the illusion of control.
This is where we have to confront a pretty uncomfortable truth. We love to believe that success is fully earned through hard work, and failure is always deserved. But the reality of money? It just doesn't work that simply. There are these massive, invisible forces constantly at play: luck and risk. Just look at the stories of Bill Gates and his close friend Kent Evans. Now, Bill Gates is brilliant, calculated, and insanely driven. But he also experienced a 1-in-a-million stroke of luck. Back in the 1970s, he just happened to attend one of the only high schools in America with a computer. That gave him an accidental, massive head start. Now compare him to Kent Evans. Kent was equally brilliant, equally obsessed with computers. But Kent tragically died in a mountaineering accident before even finishing high school. Another 1-in-a-million event, but this time it was the ultimate realization of risk. Two brilliant minds, two wildly different outcomes, and neither was fully within their control. Humility really matters here because you almost never see the full equation.
And this illusion of control extends to the entire stock market, which is largely driven by these rare occurrences called tail events. This is actually astounding. Since 1980, just 7% of companies in the Russell 3000 index drove absolutely all of the market's net gains. 7%. Meanwhile, 40% of the stocks in that same index crashed completely and never recovered. So financial outcomes are heavily dictated by these rare extreme events. One big breakout win usually does all the heavy lifting for your entire portfolio. You don't actually have to be right all the time. You just have to stay in the game long enough to catch a tail event.
Which brings us to Section 3, the ego trap. The ego trap is arguably the absolute most dangerous psychological hurdle of them all. It's that endless comparison game, That quiet, relentless pursuit of more that so inevitably destroys the very wealth you've worked so hard to accumulate in the first place. And honestly, there is no better or more tragic example of this than Sam Bankman-Fried. At 29 years old, he was worth over $20 billion. He was being hailed as the next Warren Buffett. He literally had more money than he or his entire family could ever spend in 100 lifetimes.
But he didn't know what the word enough meant. To chase more status, more control, and more validation, he quietly risked it all by dipping into customer funds. And we all know what happened. The empire collapsed overnight, leaving billions lost and himself in jail. It's the silent trap of never enough. There is simply no logical reason to risk what you have and need for what you don't have and don't need.
So why do we do this? Well, because we all want to be admired. But there's a fatal flaw in how we try to buy that admiration. It's called the man-in-the-car paradox. We buy the luxury Ferrari to show the world how successful we are, right? But when you drive that car down the street, people aren't actually looking at you and admiring you. They are looking at the car and picturing themselves in the driver's seat. Your unbelievably expensive luxury item is really just serving as a mirror for other people's own desires to be admired.
This paradox perfectly highlights the massive difference between looking rich and being rich. Looking rich involves spending money to show absolutely everyone how much money you have. And honestly, it's the fastest way to have less of it. True wealth, actually being rich, is exactly what you don't see. It's the luxury car you didn't buy. It's the exotic vacation you didn't put on Instagram. Look, wealth is loud, but true wealth is silent and invisible. It's the unspent financial assets sitting quietly, giving you options.
So the crucial takeaway here is captured in this single incredible sentence. Savings is the gap between your ego and your income. Building wealth isn't primarily about earning a higher salary. After a certain point, it's actually about needing less. It's about purposefully keeping your ego in check so that when your income does rise, your lifestyle and your desperate need to impress others doesn't just rise right along with it.
All right, Section 4, the hidden price of admission.
When we actually look at the mechanics of investing, we realize everything has a hidden price tag, and it's usually paid in stress, fear, and doubt. Look at this massive number, 35,000%. That was Netflix's historic return between 2002 and 2018. If you held it, you made an absolute fortune. But here's the catch that shakes most investors. To get that return, you had to endure the fact that Netflix spent 94% of that time period below its all-time high. You had to live with constant, grinding discomfort. Market volatility isn't a punishment. It's not a fine for doing something wrong. It is the necessary fee, the literal price of admission for getting those massive long-term gains.
And this leads us to a crucial pivot in financial psychology. Getting rich and staying rich require two completely different mindsets. Getting rich requires offense, right? Boldness, taking risks, and unrelenting optimism. But staying rich requires the exact opposite. It requires defense, caution, humility, and a total focus on pure survival. Good investing isn't really about brilliance, it's about not blowing up, so you can stay in the game long enough for compounding to actually work its magic. To survive, you've got to embrace the margin of safety. Basically, this means leaving enough room for error in your life and your portfolio to endure the completely unexpected. A margin of safety is a psychological buffer. It acknowledges that your perfectly optimized spreadsheet will fail when reality hits. By living below your means and holding a bit of extra cash, you aren't sacrificing returns. You are buying the emotional resilience to not panic when the market inevitably crashes.
Finally, Section 5, the ultimate dividend.
So, if wealth isn't about buying fancy cars to impress strangers, and it's just full of stressful volatility, what is the point? What is the ultimate tool for wealth generation? And what's the true reason we seek money in the first place? Well, to understand the tool, look at this staggering number, $156 billion. Warren Buffett is one of the richest men on earth, but over $156 billion of his net worth came strictly after his 65th birthday. The secret wasn't necessarily picking the most explosive stocks. The secret was that he started investing at age 10 and literally never stopped. This perfectly hammers home the unmatched, quiet power of compounding time. Time is absolutely the single most powerful force in finance.
But time isn't just the input for wealth, it's also the reward. Back in 1981, social scientist Angus Campbell published this massive study on human happiness. And you know what he found? It's actually incredibly surprising. The strongest predictor of well-being wasn't a luxury lifestyle. It wasn't a high salary or a fancy job title. It was having a strong sense of control over your own life. Having agency is what actually makes us deeply happy.
Ultimately, the highest form of wealth, the ultimate dividend that money pays, isn't stuff. It's the ability to wake up every single morning and say, I can do what I want, when I want, with who I want, for as long as I want. True wealth gives you total freedom over your time, it buys you peace, it buys you breathing room, and it buys you options.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to take away from this explainer. Looking at your own life and your own habits, ask yourself right now, are you building wealth just to buy things and feed your ego? Or are you building wealth to buy back your freedom? The answer to that question is going to fundamentally change every financial choice you make from this moment forward. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.